I want this session musician, virtuoso cello player to play me a little piece of music. Could you do that for us today, Justin?
I just so happen to have my cello right here.
Fantastic. So usually we talk about all kinds of stuff, right? We talk about economics, and we talk about music, and we talk about cavemen. And so what, you wrote some notes. What made you want to write down these notes this time?
Yeah, so I was just, I was thinking about what would be valuable for people. And this is sort of going further down the road of like, well, what I'm actually experted in has a lot to do with music. Although I would also say in terms of like existential philosophy, I'm pretty able to talk about that a lot as well. But yeah, in the last call, we talked about basically the history of music, going back to like Paleolithic era, and kind of like how the history of sound, rhythm, and the rudimentary to the more advanced instruments that humans made, the types of social experiences that would have underpinned music, how that all developed, and that brings us into the modern day so that we sort of understand from a more anthropological or biological sense, what is this thing music that we're dealing with? And a very, very quick recap of that is sound is an incredibly emotional sense. We respond to sounds incredibly emotionally. We also respond to sound basically in our heads, whereas our eyes are like seeing something in the eye itself before it reaches the brain. Sound we don't really process until it gets to the brain. So the visual world, which is typically seen as our dominant sense, might be what we see as the factual world, but things that we hear are going to have an immense impact on our emotions, and we can actually hear with a great degree of specificity. So when people make sounds and they make patterns, sometimes that'll just make you think of something, make you feel something, bring you to another dimension of looking at things. So it's just a very powerful, it's sort of been, as long as there's been people, there's been music. So it's just something that's super intrinsic to us. So that brings us to this talk. So basically, I wanted to separate the fact from the fiction about music. And maybe you guys, if you have ever learned music growing up, have had the experience of like, you feel like there's a bit of a disconnect between like what your music teachers at school were telling you about like how to get good at music, and then the sort of real world barriers to actually doing that. And I think that learning music is actually really difficult, and probably a lot of the things that your music teachers told you are actually correct, at least in broad strokes. Like, everybody knows that it's important to practice, for example, that like understanding scales and theory is important, and that knowing a lot of music and getting the opportunity to play with a lot of different, like, really good musicians is sort of essential for progress. I mean, those are the things that I believe any competent teacher probably told you if you learn music in school. So where does that leave? And then where does the effects of living under capitalism and making music start? So that's kind of like in the biggest thing that I want to make clear with this. And so in terms of my qualifications, I feel like I have sort of soft made it. I didn't get like crazy lucky. I'm not like, I didn't do world tours or go to like a super prestigious college, but I've developed the talent. I do get paid regularly for it. So I feel like hopefully the things I have to say are taken as like somewhat more reliable than just, the sort of whatever advice that you hear from wherever. And I also wrote gaining practical knowledge for any aspiring musicians and a better understanding of the emotional side of musicianship. So basically we're going to go through like what do you do when you monetize music? Then we're going to abstract that. Like, what is monetizing music? What is monetizing anything? What's the emotional aspect of working on music? Because that's actually pretty intense. And then we will do advice for aspiring musicians. And if there's time, kind of muse on the future of music, although maybe that's a third call. But yes, I hope that this call is like, I hope that this is sort of like a way to just go over, so I remember when I started learning Marxist theory and stuff, and I was like, previously the podcast I would listen to would be like Joe Rogan and stuff. And I just remember that, like, in contrast to like when like Ben Shapiro would talk about leftists and it's like a caricature of a leftist, when I found actual leftists talking about these issues, I was like, oh yeah, that actually sounds like the arguments they're making. Oh, what you're saying about the economics, that actually makes sense. Like of course the buying power of the owning class versus the working class is like the tension. Like, that's sort of inescapable even if you're pro-capitalist. So in the same way, I feel like the Marxist analysis of music is more accurate. So if you want to be able to apply this to your own field, or if you want to specifically be able to do better in music, this won't just be a typical lefty doom and gloom conversation, although there'll be some of that, but it'll actually be like, no, this is like how you take charge of that. Like, if you really want to be a musician, this is like sort of a lot of the information that I think can really make a difference. So, and of course, you know a lot about music as well, and have played a lot of music, and I'm sure that you will be able to help supplement the things that I'm saying as well. Because everybody is different, and that's one of the things we're going to get to talking about this. But basically the first point I titled The Wide World of Monetizable Music. So basically the point of this section is don't not pursue music because of finances, basically. Like, there are so many ways to make at least some money from playing music well that a lot of people just don't really think about, like, and a lot of people get dissuaded from following, what they really wanted to do. You only have so many hours alive. You got to make sure that you're doing like something that's valuable to you. And if it's not music, don't force yourself to do that. But if it is music, do that. So I wrote a list here of just all the things I could kind of think of. Cruise ships, where you can tour, sometimes making a lot of money, although I think that's dwindled a bit now. Being a house band where other people are going to come jam, or you're just a regular mainstay. Wedding musician, which is honestly how I make a lot of money now, playing weddings for people, especially when you're in a busy area. Like, there's weddings like basically year round. Freelance performer. A lot of people get confused when I say freelance, but there's literally all these situations where you're going to want like a cellist, whether it's like, oh, you're putting a string quartet together, you're trying to make a recording, you're a composer and you need a recording of your piece, you're like looking for real cello for the music that you're producing for sync licensing, and then like, who do you call? And then those jobs are collectively called freelance. Session player is that, but for recording. Street performer, if you have an actual thing that makes you engaging, sometimes people can actually make a crap ton of money street performing. Composing ghostwriter. So a lot of the times when you see at the end of the movie that it was all composed by such and such, it was really composed by their team and them as well. Sync songwriter. Sync means that things are composed to sync with video. So like music for TV, essentially. Music licensing, where you write things that end up getting licensed so that they can be part of a show or whatever. Church music, which I've also done my fair share of. Extras work. So as a musician, you can also be an extra. This is a little specific to places where there's film industries, but wherever they need just a cellist in the background, well, you already have the cello, you already know how to play it, so you can be the extra for that and get paid a little more than a typical extra. Then there's things that are a little bit less performing. There's copying. So these are literally just the people who are making sure that sheet music looks good for studio sessions, for orchestras. There's like prep work where you're literally like you're a prep cook, but for the music itself, the more tedious aspects of just notating, prepping sessions in your DAW for recording. Librarians, like orchestra librarians, these are actual full-time jobs. Mix engineer, a lot of people have heard of that one. Programmer, which is related, but sometimes someone's job is literally just to program the MIDI, program the synth sounds. Some of that stuff can get kind of tedious and you can use your composing skills for that. Editor, same thing. Editing audio files can literally be something that you're doing for a producer who doesn't want to spend hours doing that. And finally, I put touring musician, which again, I think everybody knows about.
Yes.
So that's a big list. Are any you can think of?
No, but you actually touched on ones that I had never thought of before, which includes programmer, but also, what did you say? Orchestra filer?
Librarian.
Orchestral librarian? What are you doing there? You putting oboes in books, and what's going on there? I don't get it.
So the orchestra will either have sheet music from its library, or it's rented the sheet music that just comes to them. And in a good orchestra, like a professional orchestra, the librarian is erasing all of the previous pencil markings in all of the sheet music. And if there are bowings that have already been gotten from the concertmaster, putting those in so that it's consistent between the parts, because that just saves a lot of time. Because if you have to do that during rehearsal and people are getting paid for the rehearsal, it's terrible. So that's why there's this job in advance. The sheet music's gonna like look legible, not have too many pencil marks, ideally have consistent bowings, and they put it in the right folders so that when you show up, you're kind of ready to just rehearse.
Okay.
So it's actually a pretty big job. It can often relate to the orchestra manager as well, making sure that, chairs are set up, and just there's so many. I think the real thing is there's so many little jobs that that's the part where it's like don't fear like not making money from music. That's where that comes from. The more you learn about it, the more you'll realize, wow, like the only reason that a lot of things get done the way they do is because there have been able to be diversified jobs. Because it's just a ton of work. Like you do everything yourself, and then it's like, oh, you have to edit, and then you have to. That's why it's a nightmare. But that's why you can get hired, because there is value in you saving someone else time to do that stuff. And we're gonna get to value in the next section. But I kind of wanted to just go a little deeper with specific people I know. I'm going to anonymize a bit, but I wanted to go a little bit deeper into sort of what I either know directly to be or have heard directly the sort of reality of some of these positions. So I did know somebody who did a lot of cruise ships. There were also a lot of grad students at my college who had that would have been a significant part of their freelance time before eventually going back. And even though sometimes you can make like $4,000 or $5,000 a month for doing it, and then you can maybe do a 6-month contract, and you come back and it's like, wow, I have like rent for the year now if I look at it that way. But you don't really have internet. I mean, it's just all the normal things about cruises. Like it can be hard to just avoid drinking because you're bored. You have to play like a lot. Like you won't even get hired unless you can you have 300 plus songs that you can demonstrate that you play, because they don't want the passengers getting bored of what you're playing either. So it's actually really hard to get. And then it's kind of shitty when you're doing it. But it does pay well in theory if you can find the right crews and get on it. Next, I have church music. So I think if I also played harp, that would be another instrument that like churches would like really want, the like angelic thing. But like cello has been a thing. And especially when it comes to like contemporary Christian pop music, you know, I show up with the jazz chops and I'm like playing over these very simple changes, and it can just be a real thing. And it's kind of amazing, like that, like this is where I just feel like God exists purely as an abstraction, because I'm an atheist, but I can make music that appeals to people's religious like sensibility. Why? Because there's something more abstract about that to the human condition, and labeling it God or saying that it's from Christ or whatever is just over limiting description of it, you know? So
Yeah,
I shut up.
Music transcends all, because it's visceral and it's biological, and it's vibration that hits the ear. It's unmistakable. Like, it doesn't matter your religion. You hear sound and you feel feelings, and you know, everybody drinks some kind of tea or beverage or beer, or, you know, there's certain biological things that, you know, music is life. It's like trees, you know, every country's got trees, probably.
Yeah. And I mean, like, yeah, I don't mean to like debunk religion with this. I just mean to say, like, there are churches that want to hire musicians, and as long as they're like not toxic, and if you're atheist, you don't like explicitly bring that up, it can be like a nice thing. Not growing up Christian, I actually have gone to church way more as an adult as a musician than as a kid, because I wouldn't have even gone with my family as a kid.
I like those songs. I like the sound of the keyboard and everything. I'm also not into the whole thing, but still the music and especially the old gospel and the old, you know, come on, that's awesome stuff. Talk about Lord Jesus, save me. Oh, I love that. That's
I guess
awesome.
the biggest downside is I'm never able to do Christmas on Christmas. I have to do Christmas on Boxing Day like the rest of the servants, because I have Christmas services to play.
That's how it is. That's when you're in like pretty much like a tourism industry or entertainment industry. You work New Year's, you work Christmas, you work all days.
Pretty much 4th of July is the one holiday that nobody thinks, oh, a cellist.
Don't you get a lot of people with romantic, like they want to propose to their wife or something, and you get to play for them?
Yeah, I've done like several of that. Yeah, lots of wedding music. That's like my wife and I together will do like the whole wedding thing. We can learn songs so quickly. We can like do whatever, you know, songs they want and do different styles. My wife has had a similar realization that I had to, like, about primarily being a jazz cellist. She's like primarily a folk and fiddle violinist these days, but we can still play pop music and like bring those skills together. And then that, I mean, you know, it's not bad. Like the wedding stuff, it can definitely pay like pretty all right.
What many people don't know is that there's this huge gap between what musicians truly want to be doing and what a lot of them end up doing for. And this is just an unfortunate part of being a musician that I found after a while. But I mean,
a lot of people have the advice that, like, you should just do something that makes money and then do like music in your spare time or whatever so that you still love it. And I disagree, because I actually want to be really good. And I'd rather, if I have to work, do something that at least in theory makes me a little bit better at the thing that I actually want to do. Like I've certainly learned from doing all of those gigs, you know. And the nice thing about booking them myself is I can be the type of player that I want to be. Usually people hire from having seen my videos specifically. So there is at least that amount of like original creativity as a part of that. But not so much if you're just like on contractors lists and then they're like, can you be in this string quartet? Here's the money. And like,
right. I mean, this is like the touring band's problem too, is going town to town every night, playing the same 10 to 12 songs and not really learning anything new or creating anything new. And I can understand that. when the Beatles became session musicians and never toured ever again and sat in the room and like overdub stuff. That's my favorite thing. That would be more creative in a lot of ways, but I still love playing in front of people too.
Yeah, there's room for both. So yeah, to move through some of these other ones. I wrote I wrote the tedium of ghostwriting, or I guess what I meant is sync writing. But yeah, I never was able to get into like composing for television. Like you have to be extremely specific with the sounds that you choose and the language, musical language that you use, and it has to be specific to the needs of television in terms of the length, how you export the different stems, and just how it's going to sound compared to the expectation. It's really, I hate it. Some people actually do seem to like it, but I wonder whether that's like the first type of music that AI is just going to completely replace real composers anyway. Because that is the easiest music to just make formulaically. And hence I think it'll be the easiest or the first place that AI music actually pretty much just makes real composers superfluous. Because also, if it's faster for the company to not hire a composer, but then composers are like, in theory, freed up to do other things they want to do, it's kind of a win-win. But of course, it's currently a loss of revenue potentially as well. I did know somebody who was like trying to transition from making that commercial music to actually like being the head composer with the name in the credits and everything for a big TV show. Because for that, you can make really big money, like sometimes like $40K a week, at least during the on season of it. But man, it's not just talent or your whatever. Like you literally, it's like the same problem where it's like the entry level position that requires 3 years of experience. Like good luck getting your foot in the door because they don't want to hire somebody who hasn't worked on a big show before. And then it's like, well, what do you?
Do you think the quality of the scores and some of the TV shows and movies that you'd be syncing to has gone down in quality over the years? I mean, like historically compared to like movies from decades ago?
Depends what you mean by good. I would doubt that the quality of music's gotten worse, given that there's better education, so people are better musicians than ever before, and there's like better tools than ever before, and it's easier to like be musically informed than ever before. But I think the limitation is like, what's the need of the job? You know, and like right now with big movies, for example, the need is, let's not make this appeal to any specific demographic so that we have equal sales in that overseas aftermarket and all that stuff. I mean, that is not a creative decision. So it does hurt the creativity of the music, but within that narrow spectrum, I would be surprised if the music's actually gotten worse, like in terms of.
Well, it's just, I think what I feel like is it's pandering right now to that whatever broad masses, and then there's nothing weird left. And it's like being weird is like my favorite thing to do with music, is to come out and do something completely unique and off the wall. And when you hear something new for the first time, like Daka Braka or like Frank Zappa or something, it just completely melts your mind, you know?
Right. We're actually going to get to that later too, because there's this idea that I didn't come up with, that the 21st century is a parody of the 20th century. And I really do believe that has been true for the first couple of decades. There's been basically no significant musical innovation, and basically everything that you play has to be from the past, essentially. It got codified when it was new then, and then now those are just the things we have to choose from, which is partly a consequence of when recording got big, which is in the 50s, I would say. I mean, you really start to like see between the 50s and the 70s, the quality of like studio technology goes through like an incredible revolution. Like between Elvis and Led Zeppelin, it's a big difference. So basically, yeah, the music that was recorded between the 40s and the 90s, and then now we have that and it's recorded and it's cemented. It's no longer as living. A lot of the artists themselves are dead, but their recordings remain the definitive way to do it. one of the things I really enjoy about jazz is that I think jazz is actually still a living art form. There are great jazz musicians alive today, people who both understand the history and can push it forward. And that's basically the world that I'm like embracing, trying to be a part of, because I do think that there's some room for the creativity there. But yeah, I one of the things I hope to see in the future is a return to taking some risks, trying some different things out. If we want to get technical later too, I'll share the music theory behind something that I composed recently, where I took the idea of how quantum particles have to be spun around twice to return to their original spot. The metaphor I saw being like, if you're holding a coffee cup and you like move it around like this, it's rotated, but your arm isn't. But if you rotate again like that, then you're back at the original spot. So that got me thinking about, well, what if instead of having octave equivalency, there's like a hyperscale that covers 2 octaves, and it's different in the second octave, but then that pattern. So I wrote something basically that's just a way to then use that concept. But like, I think that's so cool, you know? And like, I want to see more of that. And there is some of that, but it's not in the zeitgeist, and I hope it will be. So, yeah, a couple more stories. I know somebody who's like a really good film composer. He cut his teeth at the Bleeding Fingers, Hans Zimmer's, whatever organization of like composer boot camp. And he has like a house and like several kids. And he doesn't have any credits, or hardly any credits, because he's doing the ghostwriting for the bigger composers, still getting reasonably big checks. But it's like, it's basically the same problem of like, you got to get your foot in the door to actually get the big part. And that's kind of like, I think the running theme in all of this is like the glass ceiling for these jobs. So like, you can make money from all these things, but you also really don't want to burn out. So you kind of have to like either cycle through it or find your niche. We're going to get to some of the practical advice in a second, but to just finish up, yeah, so there's this contractor in LA. There's a couple now who like, they do like they'll hire you to do the extras work. And, sometimes those have big budgets too. You get like $1,000 for your day. But you have to, be there at like 6 a.m. because it's like a whole shoot. It's annoying, but it's fun to go to Warner or wherever they're doing it. And yeah, so for us, our niche, my wife and I, at the moment, in terms of like highest dollar amount, is being private event musicians, wedding musicians. For the people who have that extra money to be able to spend a few $100s on musicians, we take our virtuosity and then it's like, wow, this whole thing. But it is nice because in contrast to like a concert, a public concert, you get a lot more like engagement and like maybe a little bit even more feedback like with the people. I wish it could be for more diverse audiences financially, but it does end up working well creatively for us to be able to do these private events, which also oftentimes pay better than a concert, even for more people. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that to be true. Yeah.
It is what it is. But hopefully we'll be able to in the future, like just be able to do some more actual concerts as well with some of the sets, like fiddle for her, jazz for me, kind of like working on it. It's a whole big picture thing. But yes, let's move on to the next section, because I feel like this is also where it's going to become applicable for people who aren't just musicians. So I'm not an economist, and this is where, like, touching on the economics is where I need to caveat that, like, you shouldn't take what I'm saying necessarily as like 100% as the stuff that I feel confident saying about life as a musician or becoming a musician. However, there is like a great YouTube channel, Unlearning Economics, with somebody who is a great economist. If you don't know his channel, it's awesome. He's explicitly left-wing and has some really good videos debunking certain ideas. And one of the videos that I watched a while back was basically about value itself and different theories of value that have been proposed. And basically, go watch the video. But in short, he comes to essentially 2 points, which is, one, what people want to base value on is heavily dependent on the context in which they live. So like the Adam Smith type economists thought that value essentially came from the ground. And in a deeply agrarian culture, that is something that sort of makes sense, that the value is the things you can like grow. For Marx, in an emerging industrial world, he thinks that the value is in the worker of those at those factories. And so essentially he's saying like there may not be one actual theory of value, but that doesn't mean theories of value are useless. They're how we gauge what's important. And he did one thing I really liked about it too was like, you know, when we calculate GDP, we don't take in certain things into account. For example, what's the loss to the environment? And then the subsequent costs that are incurred to private citizens, to the government, to everybody, to the ecosystems, but like there are literal financial costs as well. We don't factor that in. So we might see a country that appears to have a high GDP, but it's because it's a big oil country. And then it's like, well, there's a different way to value that essentially. So this is why the theory of values are important. Anyways, the second point that he got to is that it is impossible to predict with any model of value what the price of a given good or service is going to be. And I think this is really important because a lot of time, even though there is a correlation between value and price, it is not hard and fast, and it is non-linear at best. And when people want to try to talk about the innate value of certain types of work over others, that is contextual. So when it comes to music, you know, I think for the most part, music costs more than it gets. You know, certain things like if you look at my finances that you wouldn't take into account if you're trying to decide if my business is in the red or black are, am I expected to pay back the money for the music lessons I had as a kid? I had a full tuition scholarship to college. You know, that could have also been a huge expense. There's like opportunities I had to not have to spend money that still cost money in the pursuit of learning music. And fundamentally, being a professional basically is that. You're getting things in exchange for, you know, the talent you can produce, the music you can produce or whatever. So you do kind of have to go into it knowing that like that is true, you know, that you have to sometimes like be patient to wait for opportunities that actually will help you be able to grow if you don't have the finances right then. And I certainly have also had to do that. Like I've never like had a ton of money for like gear. Gear is always like, I have it in the back of my mind. I do a lot of research. I realize, no, I actually will have like a much better life with this thing. I save up for it. I get it. I learn how to use it. It's a whole process, right? But the reason that you need to do that is because you need to invest more into music than it's going to get. And anytime you're like trying to do a professional music thing, you're kind of like doing, I guess in some ways, the same thing that large companies are doing, where it's kind of a grow or die situation. Like the reason why I can keep going as a musician, and especially in a changing market and with inflation, is because I immediately turn around and spend the time that I have as a result of being able to do gigs for a few $100s on the weekend into getting way better at music, learning way more songs, getting content that grows my channel and reach. If not for that, it doesn't work. So basically it is that thing where it's like, sometimes you're behind, sometimes it seems like you're ahead, but it's sort of like, if you're committed to the path, then there are ways it can work out. But certainly like any one of these things that I'm like saying, oh, you can make money from this, if that is the primary goal, probably do something else for the money. But if you're doing the work with music, just know that there is money in it, is sort of the point. So, yeah.
Would you say there's a decade that was more accurate at, you know, or just gave music a better value? Like obviously recorded music actually kind of sort of the damper on live music to an extent where it was available to people in their houses, or radio was available. Like which time in history did we actually start to lose some of that value? Because now, wedding DJs will take over for the bands and stuff like this. So we've seen technology sort of come in. And I feel like with the invention of things like the iPod, even more so, people maybe don't want to go out to a live concert. We can just sit home and watch Led Zeppelin 1973 or whatever.
I think that it started about 12,000 years ago. That's when it started getting bad. I mean, I think that people cannot like underestimate how hard it has been to be a musician. Like, one thing people don't really understand about, say, Mozart. Mozart today is not what Mozart was in his day. Mozart today represents the epitome of high class, culture, elitism, virtuosity, prodigious talent that's recognized with all of these awards and stuff. And Mozart was not that at any point in his life, essentially. Like, he was born not like dirt poor, but not to a wealthy family. The whole thing about his father taking him around to tour was because that actually did get them some money. But when they're going to do those performances, they're coming in the back ways. They're essentially servants to the upper class aristocrats who are hiring the music in the first place. And one thing that's actually really interesting about Mozart's biography is in the last few years of his life, he was fed up with the system of you can basically only make it as a composer if you are employed by an aristocrat making music that they personally like. And what he wanted to do, he was basically the first person to say, maybe I can do this freelance. And he was like trying to get funding of his own for music that he more valued and concerts. And he died like broke, dude.
Didn't he write a song called Lick My Ass?
He definitely did. He was a naughty little boy. But yeah, so I mean, that's the thing is like, every era has its like downsides. And I certainly don't say this to defend the current system we have by any means. It's more equal admonishment across time. Like, I think there's something a little bit eternal about playing music, but things come and go. The advent of recorded music changed the types of jobs and opportunities that were available to musicians, and also the way that they related to their live audiences, being able to have their music heard before even going to the place to play live. And it temporarily appeared to open up as many opportunities as it had closed. And certainly, like, now that I am used to the way that I live, it would be hard to imagine even just 20 years ago, which ostensibly was better in terms of the pay relative to the cost of things and the sort of safety nets for musicians, union gigs actually meaning something good. There was that, but there was also, I would have had to be in the city, have a telephone, because you're actually getting calls for those gigs. You know what I'm saying? So maybe it's more like 30 years ago that I wouldn't have, because there wasn't widespread email, there wasn't widespread cell phones. So, it's kind of hard to say. Like, I think that now in many ways is like as good of a time as any to be a musician, because I don't have to go to school to develop my jazz sensibilities. I don't have to frickin' live in squalor in a city center just so that I'm nearby enough to go to jam sessions regularly. I can watch masterclasses on YouTube with some of the best jazz musicians in the world. And more importantly to jazz, but like in general to music, but like especially jazz, all the information you need is in the records. And I've really gotten into this playing along to records, playing with the musicians on the record. If you can do that, like when I went to a jam session the other week, it was literally the first time I'd been to like just an open jazz jam session in like a few years. Partly because of COVID, And while I hadn't done it in years, I also wasn't rusty. Why? Because I'm doing it anyway. And I can do that because of YouTube, and I can do that because of this technology. So it's certainly like, I don't think there was like a noble past per se with any of this stuff. It's more like I'm more future oriented, looking at better things for musicians.
Yeah, I hope so. But you can't deny that the exponential evolution of music happened definitely with recorded music, because people could listen to it and then make variations on that, and sort of this hive brain mentality. So, which is great, because we went from blues to punk in 40 years or so, and it was what a ride.
What a ride. So yeah, so to kind of finish up on the economic side of this, you can really only make money where there are existing markets, is something that I've learned. So, if you want to be, so to again, just talk about my specific current path, and committing to just being a jazz musician is a bit of a risk. Previously, the difference was I was extremely jazz informed, but I was still like, oh yeah, sure, I can play whatever genre. A year ago, I would even take classical orchestra gigs because they're money playing music. So it is a bit of a risk when you focus like that. And the thing about it is, you have to look for what people already expect. Like, already part of the reason why I can make more money than a typical guitar player is the perceived classiness of my instrument. That is a pre-existing market of people looking to spend a little bit more money on a classical instrument in the first place. So when it comes to trying to find like your place within that world, it's going to work a lot better if you recognize the places where there is that existing market, and then you fill it in a way that's actually competitive within that. That's going to be a lot better than just being like if I were just like, yeah, I'm a jazz cellist, hire me. And it's like, for what? Like, you don't fit into a typical jazz ensemble, like whatever. But I'm able to fit it into existing markets for private events. I'm able to fit it into existing markets for other types of live concerts, which is really cool. Like talking about live music and bringing that back. And that's basically like where my focus is as a result, Yeah. So, I think it's pretty obvious that like who becomes good at music has a lot to do with like starting position, wealth. There's like an intrinsic class component, like with everything under capitalism. Almost all the musicians trying to be composers or producers or whatever that I met in LA, like literally all of them have wives or girlfriends. I mean, mostly I meet guys, but they have wives or girlfriends with like full-time jobs, often like in TV or something. They're stressed all the time. And like, that's how they pay for the apartment. And then they're like making some money sometimes from music, like as they're, working their way to their personal goals.
The great
music
American
costs more than it gets. That's the thing. Yeah.
Well,
music costs more than it gets.
And it's because they've made it so living in the developed world so expensive, and you have other people serve you food and wash your clothes, but you should be focused on making some kind of technology or doing something more advanced than growing your own food and stuff, which is just wrong. It's just wrong.
It's a bummer.
It sucks.
Yeah. And I mean, if you want there to be better music, more innovative music that's actually interesting, then you want affordable cities so that talented people can move to the hubs where there are those people, meet like-minded people, and actually grow and develop the music. But the inability to do that without being independently funded or without explicitly seeking one of these extremely niche ways of trying to earn money basically means that's not a thing right now.
Yeah. And I love to cook food versus where I grew up eating processed food. And the same is about music. I like music that's made with heart and soul, not produced in a factory and conceived in a boardroom. And that's kind of the big difference too with the music. And that has stolen something from people like us who we're basically small businessmen in the sense that we're going around creating value for other people. And what that does is it monopolizes music and just creates this totally mediocre, bland, watered down thing. Oh yeah, it's music. It has no nutritional value, but it's music and it's got rhythm. So here you go. Put that in your
quantized rhythm, no less.
Right. Absolutely roboticized, no flaws, disgusting.
So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit with this final economic point before we move on to the emotional aspect of music. And I'm going to ask you this. I have some answers to this, but I'm going to put you on the spot. What would music look like under socialism? We talk about some of the problems. What would it look like what would actively create a vision?
You really want to know what I think? I think, depending on the type of socialism, I don't know what kind of effect it would have, because technology also plays such a big part in the value of music and how, and yeah, stylistically, have we changed? Because I know young people today are listening to Fleetwood Mac. So, and there are new bands, and I think they are good, but I think I just worry so much that there won't be this great new revolution in styles, and then we might just be regurgitating the same thing. But under socialism, as far as musicians who are willing to work, people would flourish because they would have the time and the capabilities, because bankers, doctors, lawyers, musicians, whatever, basket weavers, whatever, would have this equal opportunity or equal footing in society where we could pursue the things and find the value. So, people would say that that's primitive, to go back in time like that and to have socialism and have everybody be even and have everybody make their own stuff again would be primitive. But
at least
in my
to some
mind,
degree, I mean, there's certain arguments to be made for division of labor, but it can also be divided in ways that it currently is not. So like Marx has that famous thing about a fisherman in the morning and like an artist in the afternoon or whatever. And it's like, I think that all the time. Like I remember 10 years ago, like just trying to like make some money while I was also working on music. And it's like the number of jobs that you can get that are not full-time jobs, those jobs suck. Like food service is like one of the main ones. I just wanted to like do landscaping like a few days a week or for like 4 to 6 hours a day. And it's like, no, you have to only do this. So like, I do think there is still room for division of labor, but also a division of labor that allows you to do the things that you like actually are passionate about. Yeah. And let that collectively add up to something that's valuable for other people as well,
Yeah. And yeah, I don't think that people are uni talented. I think everybody has multiple things that they could bring to the table that would create value for everybody else. But it's just a learning thing. But yeah, unfortunately, I really do believe that we're losing music altogether as a real thing. I mean, the instrumentation is still important. Violins on recordings are still used as standard in a lot of movies, not MIDI strings, but real strings. And so there's still this market, but people do cut corners and they do use MIDI stuff and they use low grade music. And there is a large cross section of the population that will accept that and say, yeah, it was a good movie. It had scary sounds in it. Soundtrack was good, blah, blah, blah. It's adequate, right? But it's mediocre. And that's really what I worry most about. And I think this has a lot to do with capitalism, but it also has a lot to do with technology, unfortunately.
Yeah, so that is basically identical to my first point about that, which is that it would be more diverse and innovative, like as a consequence of not having to be as shaped by these boxes.
That's good. That's a good
utility.
Point. Yeah. We're seeing a more acceptance and like less dogma about genres these days as well, which is good to see.
Probably a less emphasis. Probably there would be less like perfection in music, but there also would be a more communal aspect to it. Is one of my other thoughts about it.
Music
reclaiming that.
It's very egocentric. What music has become, especially with the terms rock stars and what hip hop people talk about mostly. There's so much braggadocio and ego, and this is like the competitive element of capitalism and testosterone. It's it's embedded in the culture, and so for some reason the music needs to reflect that. And I think hip hop is like the main genre of American. It's like the head or whatever you say. the national anthem or the national genre of the country, because it's so about money and misogyny and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, I mean, for all the ego and bravado that can go into jazz improvisation, that certainly is part of what appealed to me about it in the first place. At the end of the day, going to the jazz jam was such a great reminder that it is a language. You know, all the people who were there know how to speak the language, and we're all able to speak it together. And that's one of the things that really excites me about that, just to keep coming back. I'm so excited, dude. I love jazz. I always wanted to just be able to focus on it, and it was always like, it felt like it had to be a side thing.
The braggadocio should be in the talent, in the fingers, not in the running of the mouth, you know.
Yeah, maybe so. So the final thing I would say is coming back to the very first point that I made, that I want this to be about separating fact from fiction about music. And I think without the limitations of capitalism under socialism, some things actually would be very similar. All that stuff that I talked about at the beginning about you have to be dedicated, practice. It's kind of like exercise. You got to do it every day so that you're actively fit, that you need to be intellectually humble and like constantly seeking new music and finding new advice and trying to find different players to play with. But it would actually be only about that stuff, right? It wouldn't also then be about, okay, so then how are you able to carve out time for yourself while affording to live? How are you going to do it while managing that you have to like stay at home and it's kind of an abusive situation, but you don't have another place to go? How are you going to manage that, you know, you want to go to school for something that's going to be like, you know, reliable, but then you go to, or even if you go to music school, like the whole point of it is not to make you the best musician possible. It's to run a program that is the most marketable to get more students to come. You know, like anything, the actual stated goal is not the actual goal within capitalism. So I think that the most important thing is that the goal would become more purely about being good at music and not also navigating the waters of all these other things.
Right.
But I think that. Oh yeah.
Word of mouth is like one of the only last tools that we have left as musicians to stake our own claim in that environment and compete against that corporate media landscape. But yeah, you know, they don't make it easy.
This does feel like a good time to go to the next section, which is the emotional aspect of music. So I'm going to summarize a few points here, and then I feel like this is probably a section where you have quite a lot to talk about, I would imagine, as well, because it's like the most universal part. But yeah, a lot of people with emotional issues are drawn to music. So, you know, you might already have like a more difficult time navigating social interactions or even just your own emotional intelligence. And then you have to do that while pursuing music, which is already difficult and whatever. I think music school can exacerbate these issues, even as music itself helps. I've talked to some people who, I mean, the amount of like orchestral classical musicians who are like closeted alcoholics, it would just astound you. Like there's so much alcohol consumption at least like classical music festivals that I've gone to, or like, it's rough, dude. You have to work so hard, and you're told that you're like not measuring up constantly and that you're never going to be as good as the prodigies anyway. But then you have to like try to, and then oftentimes you're like doing like a shit ton of teaching, and then you kind of become a worse player because instead of seeking out better musicians to learn from, you're kind of like always getting a little bit worse from like the bad musicianship. It's super, super, super tough. And there's such a long game to become truly good at music that it requires something sustainable and the ability to bounce back from problems. Like I literally think that at the end of the day, the one single thing that I did that has allowed me to continue to work on music is that I never allowed anything to change the fact that my top priority was to be a musician. whether it's you something small like you just didn't get an audition that you did, or whether it's something larger like not necessarily speaking from personal experience here, but you start doing a lot of drugs at the end of college and end up skipping all your classes, and then everybody thinks you're not serious about it, and then good luck trying to get a fucking recommendation from anybody at your old school. Definitely not from direct personal experience, that last one, but it's a good example of like some people that would just be the end. And truly the ability to bounce back, I think, is the separating factor, because you do have to get those proverbial 10,000 hours. It's not literal, but the proverbial 10,000 hours one way or the other. And if you're really only able to put 10,000 hours is like 4 hours a day for 7 years ish, or like 1 hour a day for 28 years. So you can see there's a massive difference. Like if you're able to do an hour a day, you have to anticipate that it's a several decades long endeavor to get to a point of mastery, which is also not an endpoint in itself. It's just sort of like a vague, nebulous, oh, I guess I realized that I can do all these things or whatever. But yeah, I think, a couple other things that add to the emotional difficulty. One is traveling. I really felt this when I was like traveling around a lot more. It was very hard to like, a lot of my stability felt like it rested upon my like social group, and then you lose that. And along with that is the isolation that comes from needing practice time. I mean, I think ideally as a musician, you would be an ambivert. I definitely feel like an ambivert. If you're only extroverted, I think it's going to be hard to practice enough. And if you're only introverted to like an insane degree, then you're probably going to find more success in something like music theory or music librarian rather than performing music, because you're not going to get that same energy with the crowd or whatever. So, those are a couple of tough things.
And then like
with all that,
introverted to extroverted is something that artists do phenomenally well.
Yeah.
Back and forth. We go back to our workshop, we work on stuff, and then we come out and we tell everybody. And then we think about it, and we go back to our little workshop and we work on it again and we bring it back out. And it's just this iterations. Right? Go ahead.
No, I wanted to sum up so that I could let you talk more about it, but just like basically learning music, while it can be therapeutic and healthy and all that stuff, good for you, it is also going to bring a bunch of emotional problems as well. And navigating that, being prepared for that, is part of the best advice that I could give, is like to know that, to not use music as the sole place like I did in the past of trying to gain emotional intelligence, but actually also some more of the normal things too, like going to a psychiatrist if you actually need that, or like just the type of emotional intelligence to interact with people in a way that's like productive and not accidentally just, I mean, for a lot of people, I'm sure they can relate. Probably not everybody. I don't think this is like most people are like this, but for me, and I think a lot of people who might be watching this, it's like an experience I had a lot when I was younger is just saying something that I didn't even think was bad, and then there's a terrible reaction, and then I feel terrible about it, but I feel like I want to figure out what I did, but it's kind of hard to even figure that out fully, and like you go to ask people and it's not exactly clear to them how to explain it to you. That can be very frustrating. And if you're already like that, you have to find the normal, like get out of your comfort zone, be more social. You have to, get more real life experience to be, all of that stuff still applies too, in addition to then learning music. It's not like going to fix all
that. Yeah.
I think you have to do both. You have to learn people as well while you're learning music, and then it turn around. It really helps, especially if you're a performer. But yeah, navigating being a musician when you're not playing and being completely miserable, broke, going gig to gig, and then in the meantime, you're dealing with people who want to be near you or whatever, and you have to just sift through various kinds of, I mean, human beings can be horrible, and cutthroat in a lot of ways. So you got to be careful out there. And yeah, for me, I got burned out quick a lot of times, playing on the street and having people, spit on you or make fun of you or pull a shotgun out on you. That happened one time. So yeah, it happened.
Yeah. So let's get into advice for aspiring musicians. I feel like this is what we've been building up to with all this stuff. Kind of talked about the wide world of monetizing music, abstracting what makes that, work, and especially within the socialism, capitalism dichotomy. We've talked about the emotional aspects. So what's the unfiltered truth? So these are some of the notes I wrote. There's a lot of obsessed people making music, and if you're not that, you may be happier with music as a hobby. Like, I feel like that can be one of the ways to distinguish, like, if it's something worth pursuing. Like, I guess it relates in some ways to the whole like prodigy thing that I was saying is toxic about like music school, like always being compared to that. But I mean it in more of just like a practical way, where it's like, if what you enjoy about music is not something that you like are either willing or capable to be like obsessed about, then it's probably not gonna you're probably not gonna get to like a crazy place with it anyway. And if that distresses you, and then you want to, and then if me saying that distresses you and you're like, no, there's no way, good. So, just recognize which one it is and then just commit to it. Are you going to be obsessed about it, or are you just going to have it be something that you do sometimes and you're happy with that? But like, I do this thing with my wife sometimes where we say, pick one, numbnuts.
Yeah, I mean, I have the same trouble. Yeah.
So then I wrote, there's always room. So this is like a little bit of the flip side of the coin for that. There's always room for more innovative, talented, and passionate musicians. The world is always changing. The opportunities of yesteryear are not the opportunities of tomorrow. People always respond to something original and interesting. And especially if you have actually studied a lot of things and you've couched what you're doing in a lot of, like some of my favorite experimental musicians are the people who actually know all of the music that came before them intimately. And then they choose to do something different. That's innovative music at its best. So like experimental is not like a reason to not learn the normal stuff. It's something that can come out of that and even feedback loop with it. But there is always room for more innovative and talented musicians. So, you have to kind of create that bubble for yourself sometimes, but it is there. I wrote, there are at least as many ways to make music as there are people. The consequence of music having more or less a universal appeal, if you reverse it, is that many different kinds of people are drawn to music. And as a result, there's many approaches, even in a given genre or style. So like, I might be in a room with a bunch of classical musicians, and some of them are like really creative people generally, and they love the way that some of these classical works make them feel. Others will be like bootlicker types essentially, and it's like, this is the highest art and I'm like part of that. And then you'll also have people who are like, sometimes music is actually the easy path. Like your parents are musicians, you're in it from a young age, it stands out, you end up doing it in college. That is a lot of people who like are studying music or freelancing music. It was sort of the available thing for them, actually. Not that they didn't work, just that like, it's not always like a huge uphill battle. Like sometimes those people end up being kind of depressed because like they're either not actually playing the instrument they enjoy the most or like the style they enjoy the most. It's more like they played it safe, and their version of playing it safe is to be a very good classical pianist or whatever, but maybe that wasn't what they wanted. And like you go to a jazz gig and it's like the same thing, like, for me, I care a lot about like politics and existential philosophy, and to some extent economics as it relates to that. So it's like, if you also like those things, we'll be able to talk. But let's say you're the type of jazz musician who's like, you like living in the liberal fantasy bubble, and you enjoy being able to go to these venues so that you can have a drink and like socialize about some of the goings on, but you still study the music and you still speak the language. The end result will appear very similar, but it's such a different thing. So apart from the whole like obsessed or not dichotomy, I wouldn't let like the type of personality hold you back. Like there's literally room for like every single type of person in music, but you're probably going to do best when you recognize your strengths and play into that. I wrote, learn to live simply and you can rely on music income more. I think that's pretty obvious, but man, sometimes people like it really matters to them to like have not just an apartment, but like a nice apartment that they can show and stuff. And it's like, I think you're letting that get in the way of being a musician. I think.
Says the guy that lives in his van.
And is pretty good, like.
Yeah. Living simple is actually one of the best ways to feel absolutely strong and confident. I mean, there's certain costs come up, but when you're absolutely simple and frugal to the bone, life is better. And I think you have more love and more happiness in your life.
Well, I certainly don't feel what I felt when I was younger, where I felt like I just didn't understand a lot of people. I feel like now I might disagree with people, but I still can understand where they're coming from because of more life experience and because I'm not in a like super protective bubble financially. So there's like, even if I do live in many ways a very privileged life, like I don't have like a shitty job with like a boss telling me what to do or whatever. And I get to be a lot of the time in very beautiful places. I get to spend all the day with my significant other. These are things that not a lot of people can say. But at the same time, it's like I still am fixing my own car. I'm still like getting booted around by forest rangers and cops. I still am like trying to like buy the cheapest freaking food possible and all that stuff. And then it's like those are things that like everybody's dealing with. So it's like it's not like I'm losing relatability for those other things. And yeah, like at the end of the day, like music is going to matter to people if they can relate to it. And it's like, I think we all can think of artists who get worse the more money they get. Also true of actors and people like that,
Yeah. You lose the relatability of average people. And this is the most important thing. And especially for whatever reason, we love to hear stories about poor people. Like I grew up poor. And we love the blues and we love to hear hard luck stories. Hard luck stories are like strengthening and it's like the backbone of most music, not living in a soft, cushy mansion. And it's like, I don't want to hear anybody write a song from the perspective of, well, your maid didn't come. Write me a blues song. My maid didn't come. Come on, give me a break. We like people who have a real life and death story to tell that has some kind of expression about what it's like to be human, all that important stuff, Yeah.
I have been thinking more recently about like, and when it comes to value, like people who do like have a lot of people working for them. Like you're not cleaning your house. You have like a maid team that's like cleaning your house. You're not doing anything with your car. You have other people doing that. At a certain point, it's like totally ridiculous because while I can buy the idea of like division of labor and like people working together for a common goal, when it comes to rich people, the common goal of sometimes hundreds or even thousands of people in the case of billionaires, it's just so that this guy can like live as a king or girl or whatever. I mean, it's really, really dumb. Like, it's such a waste of productivity.
This is one of my favorite topics because there is a biological effect of what's happening. Like, they stuck these rich people in MRIs and they were showing them pictures of like children being set on fire or some ridiculous shit. And they found that this part of the brain that's supposed to light up and does light up with like working class people doesn't light up. So they don't feel this sense of empathy and stuff. And what happens is they're competitive, and their competitiveness tends to make them look upwards at some of the other more successful monkeys. And then at some point they make justifications for why they need that lifestyle, and basically just, well, he's got a helicopter, I need a helicopter kind of behavior. And ultimately, that allows them enough deniability to not even look at us. And then, a lot of these rich guys think that they're descended from the pharaohs. They, classics itself, this study of ancient Greece and ancient Roman, is incredibly rife with elitist, racist kind of people who want to believe that, white people were the first, smartest, because there's a creepy academic eugenics thing behind it. But yeah, anyway, sorry. I just forgot where I was at.
No, it's all good, dude. I'm actually, so this is the final point before the epilogue where you and I do some musing on the future, maybe just open it up more broadly to some of the things that we like to talk about. But this is kind of like this is the conclusion. So at the start of this, I said I wanted to separate fact from fiction about music, especially when it comes to navigating capitalism. We went through some of the different jobs you can do, which I really just brought up as a way of being like, there is a path there. Like, don't over fret about it or not choose music through it. And I wanted to just summarize everything by saying, realize that the system does suck. That like everything I'm saying comes with like tons of grains of salt. And things have been worse. Like the things that you and I might advocate for musicians are like just a part of everything that leftists advocate to get better. It's not independent from that. It's not like things have gotten way worse for musicians per se. Things have gotten worse for the average person in terms of political power. That affects everybody, including musicians. I did think it's funny that it's like the default comment on socialism is like, well, then people can pursue art or music or whatever. And so, at that point, that's where the hard work, the practice, the dedication, the consistency, the love, the obsession, all of that stuff comes into play. But you have to do that stuff while navigating capitalism. And that can be impossible sometimes. But, hopefully this was of value, these things that I brought up.
Yeah. Well, I will say that music can be, if you do it right and you're decent at it and you understand people enough, it can be a recession-proof kind of thing, like apocalypse-proof, because there are a lot of people out there when they get kicked out of their office jobs or any kind of number of obsolete kind of mundane jobs that may be taken soon in the future by robots. They lose their job, lose their house, and realize how quickly they can be redundant and have actually no real talents to survive by beyond that. But musicians, in 2008, I was living on the street and they were like, there's a big fucking housing crash. People are losing their houses left and right. Everybody. I didn't feel a thing. Didn't feel a thing because I was on the streets hustling, making money. And people, especially during the Great Depression in the 20s, it's like movies and stuff took off because people needed a way to distract themselves. So I think there could be nuclear bombs going off in the background. You could be making money off of people because I think it is always inherently valuable.
And even if not money, like trading value generally. I mean, yeah, COVID hit us, I'm not going to lie, differently. I wouldn't say it was like great per se, but some of the highlights include now so many more people have had a phase where they were like really depressed. And it's like, that's always been one of the things that if you've never had depression, it's going to be hard for me to relate to you. And it's like, wow, this is great. Everybody understands this a lot better. Isolation, buddy, welcome to my world, And then like, I'm a private event musician primarily. What did people want to do despite the recommendations. They wanted to have private events. So I mean, it slowed down, but the gigs didn't stop for me.
Yeah. I was social distancing way before social distancing was cool, man.
Yeah. Man, one of the best things we got from COVID is like last week I mentioned before the call that I had like kind of a bad cold, and I went into town and I wore a mask. And I never did that growing up. That was not part of what we were taught to do or whatever. It's so easy. Just help reduce, like, I don't want to get other people sick, but I still had to run errands. Just wear a mask.
That's great. I'm glad that we learned that.
I like the anonymity, frankly. I like that.
He says with like the hint of like a soul patch goatee kind of coming through.
Oh yeah, this is my wispy Scottish beard. It never came in. Yeah,
my hair just fell down. I'm lucky that I was able to maintain the virility here because it ain't here anymore. I think I'm gonna. I don't want to do the Tim Pool beanie thing, but I have been thinking about the Thelonious Monk beanie thing. You know, like where it's kind of just barely on the top and like, yeah.
I just spring for the cowboy hat.
I have one.
Yeah.
I wear it from time to time.
People would be totally confused. He's a jazz cellist. He looks like he's going to play Hank Williams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's some of my thoughts about the future. I'm kind of curious what you think of all this stuff. So I don't know if we should save AI for last. Obviously, that's like a really big one. But I think that AI is going to like change the way that we think about remote session work, mixing, coming up with ideas, and especially sync music for TV, like I was saying earlier. I mean, it is undoubtedly going to change the landscape as significantly as the internet did. And I don't necessarily know if I see that much bad coming out of it. I mean, any more than there's going to be bad from any other aspect of automation under capitalism. I mean, apart from that, I don't see any issue. It's only because of that there's an issue. But what do you think about that?
I'm not happy about it, but because this is just a continuation of what I said earlier about technology sort of devaluing music. And I guess that's...
maybe it'll revalue it. You know, like I was saying, like I've gotten fewer remote orders since the pandemic because now that's something that everybody does. Before the pandemic, that was actually something that I could do that not every cellist could do, but now every cellist can do that. But you want to know what's gone up is the demand for live players. And I feel like a similar thing has got to be true in a world with AI music where it's like, yeah, of course you can go listen to like perfect engineered music.
Yeah.
That's not even made by a human, but you're going to want actively to go see a real musician.
So yeah, and I agree with that actually, because the what I've noticed in the trend with AI images and the computerization of everything, people still, with if anything that comes from a robot, people would rather have. We want to listen to this stuff not because it's made by a robot, but because it's made by a living being that's expressing emotions that we're supposed to be relating to. Now, there are some instances where the music could be just utilitarian and just used for, oh, we just need this kind of sound right there. And that's fine. And you can AI generate that and it would fit the purpose in some small way. But when it comes to a band with a style and a sound and an identity who you want to attach yourself to, right? Shouldn't there be some kind of emotional human aspect to it?
Yeah. And I mean, not even every aspect of the appreciation of music is like, strictly speaking, even emotional. Like a lot of the times I'll find music to be interesting. Like it's more of a head thing. But I mean, I enjoy the feeling of things that are thoughtful, right? So that it is still related to emotion, but like, yeah, I mean, there's like a whole thing to it, you know? Like one of the things, like one of the artists who I feel like actually I can bring up two jazz artists who I feel like transcend jazz itself and are just generally very popular with people are John Coltrane and Miles Davis. Very different players, though they played together. That's actually like John Coltrane's start, more or less, as being in Miles Davis's band. And Miles Davis, man, making mistakes, having weird notes, but that was a bad motherfucker, and that's what you hear when he plays. You hear the confidence. You hear the absolute, unremittent, just like, this is what it is. Exactly in time. You know what I mean? The time is impeccable. The fact that he's flubbing some notes, it doesn't matter. The reason why that happened is he had attitude. And that's what people relate to there. John Coltrane, very different player. He can play 10 times as many notes and make far fewer mistakes doing so. But that dude brought music onto a spiritual level in a way that, like, most of the time when you like want to attribute someone's music to like having a spiritual component, it's a little hokey to do so. I don't even think it's that hokey with John Coltrane. He genuinely was like totally obsessed with what music could be, and he was like innovating the scales that he was using. So when it seems like he's playing a flurry of notes that go by too quickly to even make sense, there is still a pattern there that's being used, being curated by a person, and being transmitted to you with phrasing and timbre and shit. And in very different ways, those two players represent to me what AI will not be able to do.
I got the opportunity to go to the church of John Coltrane in San Francisco. And it's this little tiny kind of building.
What was that like? Yeah.
Fillmore Street. It's cool. Just a little hole in the wall. They held services now and again and played jazz music. It was cool. But yeah, I mean, that's why I've never heard, there's not too many guys that have a church named after him. You have the Birdland is named after Charlie Parker and some other clubs. But yeah, Church of John Coltrane. John Coltrane was mad. And what is this, bop music where it's like, it's 1,000 notes per minute?
Bebop, yeah.
Bebop, right. Yeah, I think this is the closest that you could take jazz music and turn it into a sport of some kind, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, sometimes they're called like cutting sessions when people like are like soloing back to back.
Yeah.
Yeah. It definitely can have that element to it. And you know, it doesn't take long as you try to get better at jazz before you realize that like playing fast isn't even everything because it's like almost easy to play fast. Like you just have to practice scales and then you can play fast. But like then it very quickly becomes like, okay, what are you really doing with the notes? It's like high level stuff, you know.
And what they choose to do is try to take you on a journey and then give a twist that maybe is like you didn't see coming. And that's one of the best things you could do as a musician is to not play the note that maybe felt like it was intended or something. Or sometimes give the people exactly what they want, which is some beautiful kind of melody. But then sometimes, exploring that and then choosing things that are weird and different. And Miles Davis was a nut. He would just come into the studio and say, he wouldn't rehearse. He would just come in and say, okay, here's the thing. Let's do it. That's that confidence you talked about. Just an insane.
He was extremely confident, especially if you watch him perform. He like prowls the stage and like, it's kind of mesmerizing. It's inspiring for sure.
And unfortunately, he was a wife beater, or so we're told. A little bit of a temper, a little bit of a crack problem, but hey, who doesn't? Yeah, I mean, we could talk a lot about jazz and jazz performers and stuff. There's some. Have you ever heard of Rahsaan Roland Kirk?
I have not. Who's he?
He was a blind saxophonist, and what he would do is he could play. He was a little off his rocker, like he was a little schizophrenic. He sang songs about outer space and stuff, but he had 3 horns. He could play 3 saxophones at one time. This was like circa 1950s or so, early 60s. But these performances are outrageous. Next time I get a screen share, we could prepare that. Yeah.
That would be sick, dude. Yeah. I mean, I could honestly do a call where we just talk about jazz history, jazz culture, jazz music theory. Like, I love it, dude. Yeah.
I love the beginnings too. It's in New Orleans. They really are serious about it because the Congo Square is still there, and they still have second line parades and stuff with big brass bands, and the streets are really just full of jazz at night. And I miss that town. It's like the murder capital of the United States, and there's more people in prison in Louisiana than any other state. So, but at the same time, that place is so cool. It's hard to describe. Like you could, every day you wake up and you're still, I used to sleep in my car in New Orleans, in like outside the French Quarter, and in the winter. And you would just feel fortunate every morning you woke up alive, because on the next block, some homeless person would come up and say, hey, we got shot at last night on our block and stuff. And shit like this would happen. People get murdered all the time. But then the music, and then Fat Tuesday and Mardi Gras and all this shit. It's amazing. It's a really amazing place. Sticky, hot. I couldn't live there. I couldn't live there forever.
Well, I think that one of the things I look most forward to in the future is a renaissance of new sounds and ideas. I think a lot of people want that, and we're limited by our context more than anything. We're not limited by a lack of desire. We're limited by the context in which we find ourselves. And yeah, like one of the things that I really do love about the world of jazz is the uniqueness that every player brings. How everybody's basically also a composer and a music theorist. And that if you really are invested in the history of the music, you can make new music that actually comes out of that tradition. And it's not randomly new, it's new as part of a progression. I think that's really, really cool. While other genres may have that to some degree or in a literal way, I feel like it is in a very vibrant and organic and living way with jazz, which I really, really enjoy.
So which players have you been listening to? Which ones are your favorites?
I really love the piano player Michel Petrucciani.
Okay.
He especially if you find a concert where he's just playing solo piano and not with a band, it feels very stream of conscious. He'll move in and out sometimes, kind of intuitively doing medleys of different songs. He's also has like dwarfism. He died in his 30s, and he couldn't actually like reach the whole piano. So like if you watch him play like Caravan, like look up this live performance of him playing the tune Caravan, he takes a solo in the middle where he just plays a line. So he's not doing comping with the left hand. He's like supporting himself on the piano to go even higher. It's just remarkable. I mean, like the dwarfism thing is certainly like the way that you'll remember him if you've like seen a video just once of him playing, but it really is not like the creative mind is like everything that I want to be able to do when I'm doing solo jazz cello, like how we started. Another person who's like really, really fantastic is somebody who is often credited with being the best saxophone player alive today, which is a hard thing sometimes to say, but his name is Chris Potter. And I watched an interview with him on Rick Beato's channel, and he's actually like really down to earth and cool, which is like amazing because you never know sometimes just listening to people play. But like he like listening to him talk really resonates with me. Like he was the one who, like, it was listening to him that I was just like, yeah, fuck it, dude. Like, I'm just going to go to the records, play along to the records. He's like, yeah, I just did that. Like, I didn't necessarily transcribe per se, but I like would try to copy what I hear. And he talks about interacting with the geometry of the music. So, you know, like you can sort of imagine a shape as you're playing different lines. Ba-ba-da-ba-da-da. And then you can bring that shape up. Da-ba-da-ba-da-da. So, you know, he can think in terms of those sort of shapes, and then building on that, you really hear those patterns like in the way that he improvises. And I really, really enjoy that. Another saxophone player who's just got the most impeccable phrasing, sense of rhythm, and like feel is Patrick Bartley, who's like my age, which is like sometimes I feel bad thinking about that. Yeah, but it's okay. We're all on our own journeys and stuff.
I do too. I get it. Don't worry. That's completely natural. I wouldn't want to be competitive as much anymore because I think it makes me crazy. I'm not great at compete. I either want to kill everybody or I want to be friends with everybody. But I couldn't it's hard for me to have friendly competitions and then lose. Cause
no, I agree. I'm like one of the only jazz cellists in the world. And for all I know, I'm the most virtuosic one because I haven't heard anybody play like more over the instrument. I think it's so hard to play my instrument in the first place, and then independent of that, also so hard to play the jazz language, that unless you've had like the same very weird stack of like biography that I have, you're unlikely to be doing it. And if you do, it's gonna be just as unique to you anyway. So I agree. Like I prefer that, being able to just be really great at something, but not in direct competition to other people, compared to like something that is very, very competitive, like orchestra auditions or classical music school auditions. Yeah.
it's the modern world. We don't need to, we can have games and do it sport for fun, but
it can be exciting that there's other people you get to share the love of music with more than it is like that you should fear somebody else. I mean, when I was younger, yeah, I mean, I understand that, but genuinely, and this this goes with what you're saying about the competitive nature, it makes no sense. Like genuinely, I don't even feel that anymore. Like if I see a player that is really like astounding to me, I just get excited and I want to learn how to like emulate it. That's the social aspect.
And that's confidence.
Right. I mean, it's also probably based on that too. One name that I also should bring up, because there really aren't like a lot of great jazz cello people to go look at. I can give you names like Paul Katz or Eugene Fraser, who teaches at Berkeley. There's Rashad Eggleston, who's not really a jazz cellist, but look up Rashad Eggleston for a good time. He's definitely also just doing something completely unique that anybody else to even approach that would just be different anyway. Yeah, I mean, but there is one violinist who really stands out to me as a true master of the swing language, and I continue to feel inspiration from, and that's Stefan Grappelli.
Oh, God, yes. Oh, my God. What an amazing human being.
He had a crazy life too. Like his mom died when he was like 5, and then his dad had to go fight in the army, and so he was like raised in an orphanage, but he was like taking violin lessons when he was like 12, and he was busking on the street for all his income when he was 15, and he never had like the formal education. He was learning on his own. He eventually like taught himself piano and was learning to play like for like silent films and stuff like that. And he was like in someone's band as a pianist when the band leader found out that he had played violin, that he knew how to play some like jazz violin or whatever. And he's like, dude, come on, play it. And then from then on, it's like, dude, you have to do this. Kind of goes back to like following what you're actually like good at, I guess, to some degree. Because he really loved piano and he never stopped playing it. But violin was just something magical, unique to him. Jazz violin, yeah.
That sound too. What about that tone? That sweet romantic tone the guy's got.
Yeah. And his bow control for the swing rhythms is so inspiring, dude. His time too. Like it's just he plays all these, scales and patterns and stuff, and it's just all like it could be a drummer. It's mind-blowingly cool. Yeah.
And played into his old age and stuff. There's a concert everybody should look up, Stefan Grappelli in San Francisco. And
oh, dude, I've listened to that so many times.
Yeah,
bro.
1980 something. Unbelievable. And also when you see these old concerts and see the look on his face and see that he's having fun.
Yeah, he's always got the smile.
Yeah, he's just one of the greatest players. To hear him play Stardust or something like this, it kills me. It crushes you. I mean, there is no jazz violin player that I could name. There's two greats, Jascha Heifetz, which that's classical, and for me it's Stefan Grappelli.
There is a guy, Zach Brock, who's like in New York, who is like probably like a preeminent jazz violinist like on the scene. I don't want to like disparage him, but he's no Grappelli to me. But he's a name to look up if you like are interested in more.
My violin player on my record is probably up there with also some of the. I've heard so many people on the violin. This guy really has something special, and I'm a crazy person, so I'm throwing curveballs at him. I say, I'm naming him all these sounds and I make it more green, make it more blue, make it more crunchy, make it more Asian. And he's good. He's just creative and you've heard he's a hell of a player.
Yeah. I was really impressed listening to, his playing on your music.
That makes my music when you have all these awesome people. And the good thing, I didn't have to pay them. They just happened to be friends, and it worked. If there was one thing that I gained from being homeless for so long was going around and trying to find the best musicians who were willing to play and try to recruit them any way I could.
Totally. Yeah. That's how I feel about this drummer who I met at the jam session, who I was just like, really impressed with, and he was like so nice, and he spent the whole gig like looking around and being very intuitive, like available, for a musical communication player. And yeah, like I think we're gonna start off kind of just creating music. Hopefully, I mean, at a certain point, I have demos lead to gigs, and gigs are paid. So it's like, but that kind of goes back to like, if the money is like the thing from the outset, then sometimes it's hard to even get to the money because you're like self-limiting before the.
They'd say you got to get a gimmick and get a put a girl in the band, or get on the internet, make a TikTok video with covering AC/DC in a coonskin cap. You see these guys do that? It's these like Scandinavian rednecks that cover AC/DC, but they do it with bluegrass instruments, and it's a gimmick, and it works, and you get. Then holy shit, do all the people want to see? I don't know, man. It's a rough out there. What my interpretation of what audience is available to me and the type of music I play, it's grim, and so that's why I've kind of backed off my dream and just sort of tried to enjoy it as a hobby for a while. But I'd love to play it again as a.
How do you feel, given that you say that? How do you feel about the piece of advice that I gave earlier about recognizing if you are the obsessive type who cannot stand to not be doing music full time, or if you're a hobbyist with it? Do you resonate with that? Would you back up that advice?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to know which one you are, and then at what point do you decide where your threshold is. Say, I've taken enough abuse. I'm obviously not gonna make it, or I feel like I'm not gonna make it. And there's other things that I want to do. And as long as that's the case, then you kind of wander off. But if you're really committed, obviously you'll be persistent, and you will make it. Like, that's the thing, is that people like, I can name all kinds of folk musicians who didn't make it till they were in their older years. And,
sometimes sometimes that's when they become like relevant to people or resonate with people or whatever term you want to use.
That's when they have the best voice. Like Tom Waits is in his prime at any time in his career, but mostly the older stuff. Like he reinvented himself and has an incredible sound. But yeah, it can happen at any time. So what you said is true. It's know what you're going for, know what your threshold is, but if you stick to it, there's no telling what can happen.
Yeah.
It's worth it to do something in life because we have two paths, right? We can go with, I want to be an expert that focuses on this one thing, and you'll probably be more likely to be praised and everything for what you do. But there are drawbacks to that, like you miss out on other things maybe in life or certain other hobbies or time with others. But still, you're going to have a legacy when you die. You're going to be somebody was known for spreading joy. And I think people like us, I don't know, I think psychologically we go for music because it's a way for us to express our emotions, express what it's like living on Earth and stuff. And that's important. And we value that. And so we want to spread that. And I guess I'm just a quitter. I don't know, because you're going to stick to it. And I think you're going to have success, and you're going to be probably one of the best cello players, I don't know, in the world. I don't know what the competition's like, but you're, absolutely.
At least for my niche within it.
Right.
A jazz cellist / composer, whatever.
The most famous jazz cellist in the world. How about that?
Yeah.
That's a type you could go for and probably win. But,
and that's kind of where I'm at. But one thing you got to keep in mind for anybody listening to that and thinking, oh, it sounds really obvious for me. I've only even recently allowed myself to fully commit to that, because I spent years being like, oh, maybe, it's different things, like maybe it's like, oh, well, if I really want to take cello seriously, I have to learn classical music and go to like classical music school. And I burned out on that. And, I spent like years after moving to LA being like, I guess the thing I'm trying to do is like be a session player, maybe for big movies, with the improv thing as like something that sets me apart. Like I've kept going through times where it's not even clear, like, if any is the path to like that type of like success that you were describing. And that like you may not have that from the beginning, but like you were saying, like if you just keep going, eventually, I mean, I think things become clear. But also like with saying, quitting classical music or whatever, like music is such a long-term game that if there's any amount, really, it's kind of like a marriage, right? Like a marriage, small things fester, right? So things like when you get married, you might think, oh, this incompatibility issue is not a big deal. Okay, but then you have to live for like 60 years maybe with that incompatibility. It's kind of like that with music. Like if there's really any amount of like true toxicity to like how you're going about it, like it just can't last. Like that cannot be how you continue trying to make music. It's not going to work.
Yeah. No, not under duress or any kind of financial strain, or when you really start suffering for it, or when I got to a point where I had to wake up every morning with an accordion and figure out a way to eat. And that was playing accordion. And after a while, I just got pretty sick of that.
Yeah. And it's okay to take breaks too, and like rediscover what you even like about it. I mean, another thing as far as like being okay with just doing what you actually like with music is that it'll probably be what people enjoy hearing the most as well of you.
Yeah.
Is what you like the most, because it's what you're probably best at.
I mean, if somebody's on stage and they're like crying, they're like, I don't want to be here. And I'm like, not into it. They're not have any energy. Of course, nobody wants to see that. We can pick up on, like you said, we can pick up on little note variations and stuff like this. We also pick up on body language and cues and energy and volume and stuff. And if that's not right, like people, we can tell when you're smiling if your eyes aren't smiling, right? There's actually
right.
eyes go. That's so. The authenticity of music is still sort of important and hard to fake, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's one of the things that even makes it hard. I mean, there's like all these like pitfalls, I feel like, in making music. I mean, we touched on it with the emotional section of the prepared notes, but like one of the things that happens is when you first want to learn music, you have a very sophomoric impression of what music is. You don't know that many artists. You don't know what goes into making it good. And by the time you've learned a lot of those things, you know so much more. And what you even enjoy in music might have actually changed based on that change. But then you have to find a way to connect it back to people who don't have that. How do you find the universal relatability where it can still be interesting to you, the musician, but relatable to anybody who's just got ears and like a heart, you know? That is one of the harder things, like underrated things that people just don't even think about until they've started trying to learn it, is that like sometimes in the process of learning it, you get better at music, but worse at playing music the way that people actually want to hear it who don't play music. The way that you responded to it initially can be a hard thing to come back to.
It's like a car. It's like everybody loves cars. Everybody loves music, but you have to get them excited about like the carburetor. They're like, well, I don't know what it does, but you have to like sell it a little bit and try to make it interesting. And at some point you realize that there's a huge disconnect between the language you're speaking and the language that they're speaking, what they want to hear, what they expect to hear. And you're just like, there's better music I could play for you right now. They're like, no, Fields of Gold. Come on.
Yeah. No, I mean, and it's all good. That's just part of it. I mean, life is not about like total efficiency, completely going for specific. I mean, that's like hyper capitalism, like West Coast tech culture. But I mean, dude, to veer back to some political and economic stuff, some of the best things that we have would have never come about in a purely capitalist society. The internet was not profitable for so freaking long with the things that came before the profitable, like Web 2.0 or whatever. It was like government funded stuff. It only became privatized once it became clear how to make a profit off of it, which is so freaking stupid because it's like the people essentially invested in what made the internet and then we don't get to just profit from that collectively. That's so freaking stupid.
GPS.
But yeah, like
GPS as well.
Yeah, like, but, so to then come back to music, it's like, you cannot just you cannot just be like, oh, I'm going to just learn all these songs and listen to all these albums and then I'll be good. I mean, like, that's a great starting place, but that's not going to be everything. Like, you also just need to mess around with it and like let it affect you at different times. I remember listening to The Dark Side of the Moon in high school and feeling like the only song that I could really kind of connect to was Money, because it was like the most sort of normal song. The rest of them are like way more like out there and stuff. But man, I listened to that album again after I had to drop out of grad school, homeless for the first time, feeling terrible. And I listened to that album and I was like, how is it that these people can understand what I'm feeling so well? And I was like crying.
Yeah. There's no denying it. That's a secret, is that album is one of the best things ever. Just fire up a doobie and play that fucking record, man. And yeah, music has that effect on me. I get sentimental when it comes to the death of the counterculture in the 1960s and some of the music that existed at that time. And then what happened historically after that, which was the disillusionment and the dissolution of the counterculture.
Well, I mean, apparently hardcore anarchists of the 50s didn't like the hippie movement because they saw it as a bourgeois, like, fake counterculture. And I think in hindsight, we can see that they were more or less correct to criticize it that way.
Yeah, because look, at the end of the day, the amount of hedonism that came along with the counterculture, like who's going to run the dams, who's going to run the nuclear power plant, or like who's going to, they didn't have any real idea what they were going to do. Because certain things, certain technologies that they enjoyed as white Western teenagers still had to be upkept. You couldn't just take acid, tune in, and drop out and forget to do your laundry because you'll get body lice. And I found all that stuff out firsthand because I tried to live that lifestyle. But yeah, you had the anarchists of the 40s or the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And then you had the beatniks of the 50s. And then finally the hippies of the 60s, but constantly living off the excess of America. But still, you got to admit, there hasn't been a movement like that since. In the 80s,
will say that what that movement to me did most successfully was merely like introduce the aesthetic of counterculture to the mainstream, which is not insignificant.
No, but the ideology is gone.
But the ideology was never that grounded to begin with, and it eventually got consumed by capitalism, in no small part because a lot of the hippies were from like well-to-do white families, and then as they grow up, it's like, oh, well, I guess I gotta like run businesses and shit, and then they become basically
they become yuppies in the 80s. That's the whole problem. But then again, it happened to punk. You know, they turned around and saw this cultural movement that was anti-corporate and anti-consumerist, and turned it around and made it into a living museum where they sell the idea back to people, but they leave out, you know, anarchy and squatters' rights and, you know, anti-war and all this kind of shit. So somewhere along the way, and thankfully, these movements actually also inform people a lot. With the music of the 60s and the music of the 80s, how much anti-war or anti-corporate or whatever it was, political. This is also a huge part of what's missing from music today. And what nobody really, protest songs are so, but there have been some that were incredibly important. And you go back to Woody Guthrie singing about union breakers, strike breakers, massacring people in mines and factories. It's incredibly important to have a working man's culture, something where the working man owns that television station and that radio or that channel of where information comes from should be ran by average workers. But we don't see that in America. We see everything is corporate, and all the information we get is passed through the filter of our corporatized culture, which is just, I told my wife the other day, it's just like, it's so disgusting that our cultural values and what we think is important and what we think is what it means to be human has all passed through the filter of corporations and consumerism. And that's super sad. I can name more food mascots on cereal boxes than I can name you know, planets or, you know, species of birds. So, anyway.
Truly, dude. Well, I'm so glad that I finally succeeded in not having either my phone or my microphone. The first call with you, the phone died, but I was able to catch it. We were able to like sign off. The second call, I plugged the phone in, but then the microphone died, and then we had some blank audio for a little bit. But today, we can actually end this podcast solidly, however we want to. And one thing that I did want to close-ish with is, again, kind of, to add some positivity to the normal doom and gloom of typical leftist conversations, just like, what are some things you're excited about for the year, calendar year, or whatever?
What am I excited about? Oh God, I'm excited about making pizza. I'm excited about doing this podcast. I'm excited about some of the guests I'm going to attempt to get on my show. I've got a whole list here of people I'd like to talk to. And I'm excited the fact that it's gone well so far. And I've been able to talk to nice people like you, who are incredibly talented, and other legends, where I never thought I'd be able to, have a little chat with these people. Really inspiring people. Other than that, cooking vegan, exploring the vegan cookbook, trying to make cheese out of cashews and shit like that.
I am gluten-free now. Like if you think that that's cool. I actually feel way more level because I don't have the same spikes of. I did it because I was like realizing like maybe I'm sensitive, my stomach and stuff, but it's like cleared up my skin to just be like, and it's also like some of the most addicting foods for me is like, like pasta and cereal and bagels and stuff. Now that all that's gone, it's like, oh yeah, I pretty much am just eating healthy because those were like the things that would like get me down. So it's like I'm healthier, leaner, skin's clear, mood's more level.
Whatever works.
Nice.
Yeah. I think whatever, you have to kind of experiment with what your body is asking. Everybody's different. But yeah, as long as you feel the best you can, you feel fit, it really doesn't matter. Going vegan is always good for everybody out there listening because the animals will thank you for it. But I have to say that I'm bound by the cult of veganism to spread the propaganda far and wide.
As you should, because I morally 100% agree with veganism anyway. Like I'm pro not having to kill animals or not having to have animal cruelty and all that. Yeah.
At least there's people out there that say, well, it makes sense. And that's a great step. And that's really, and the people I argue with, they want to make up kind of other truths about how vegetables will kill you. And so it's interesting. It's an interesting time to be alive in that sense. But I'm my own kind of guinea pig where I'm going to find out, even though that there's been people for centuries doing it, I'm trying it out and seeing how it is. So far, so good.
Yeah.
No, it's yet. But yeah, we'll come back and we'll do it again, like always we do. Yeah. Anything that you want to add before we go, and we'll talk after?
I'm just excited to go up to Oregon to keep working on my love of jazz and just seeing where that kind of can take, slowly ease the direction for me. Yeah.
What else are you excited about? There's got to be more.
That feels like the main thing, just with like some of the life hassles from the last few months, like in no small part due to the climate events. But I've gotten really into like climbing as a hobby. So I'm excited to try to maybe find some new places to climb. I am excited about maybe growing the channel, but I feel a little bit like that's a secondary goal. Like it'll come from the work I'm doing on the music itself, leading naturally to content. Then it'll be like a content first sort of thing, which is also for me, just as like a player first, it is nicer to think that way than to put YouTube above all else, which I was for a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a tool. I think it can be good, but it's not for everybody. And I think it can be, what you do, I would prefer to live that way, but now I'm all digitized and here I am sitting behind the computer, and it's not as fun, but it's more.
But you don't
safe.
have to deal with wind and sun getting on your spot. I was actually pretty annoyed earlier, got to be honest. So
yeah, see, that's it. I'm super
trade-off.
cozy. I'm in my jammies,
Well, I'm in my jam. I wear sweatpants and shorts too.
It's chill.
Okay,
But
all
yeah,
right,
yeah.
good.
No, certainly it's Yeah, I did fix the I haven't gone to a mechanic in so long, and I had tried to fix the alignment, which was off, and then it didn't take, and then I got some thread lock, and I just did it again. So fingers crossed. But that's always fun.
Yeah. That's your boat. That's your castle.
Yeah.
You got to keep that thing going.
All right, man. Well, let's with that.
We'll
sign off.
We'll sign off. All right, everybody. This has been Justin Lepard. I'm Chris Jeffries. We're going to sign off, and we're going to wish you adieu, bid you adieu, wish you a good night, a Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year.
Thanks
Ciao.
for watching.